he never talked about the dog. Not to his wife, not to his kids, not even when the nightmares came. But every year on June 6, he would polish a dented silver medal and place it beside a photo of a mutt no one else remembered. 60 years later, a stranger's letter arrived postmarked from Normandy, and everything he buried clawed its way back to the surface. Part 1: The Stray. Normandy, June 1944. Private Earl Hargrove crouched low in the mud, heart drumming like enemy fire. The hedgerow smelled of smoke and damp earth. His boots were soaked through, socks clinging like wet rags, and the rifle in his arms felt heavier than it had this morning. He was 19. Back home, there was a girl named Mabel and who baked peach pies every Saturday and waited for him on the porch swing. But that felt like a postcard from another life. Here there were mines, snipers, and boys calling out for their mothers with blood in their mouths. He was not sure how long they would been pinned, maybe 2 days now. German fire raked across the ridge like clockwork, keeping his unit huddled in foxholes that had become their coffins in waiting. Command was cut off. The radio had been shot to hell. That is when he saw it. A movement in the bramble. Earl lifted his rifle, finger steady, but it was not the enemy. It was a dog. Not some military canine, just a scruffy mutt with patchy fur, a crooked tail, and eyes too human for a battlefield. He looked half dead, ribs showing through, limping as he picked his way toward the foxhole. Earl should have waved him off. Too much noise, too much risk. Instead he whispered, "Come on boy." The mutt came, silent as shadow, and dropped beside him with a sigh like an old man settling in. Earl stared. The dog stared back. Then, for the first time in days, Earl smiled. He gave the dog a piece of stale biscuit. The dog licked his hand once, then curled up beside him and did not move. That night the shelling eased. Corporal Anders, 3 holes down, yelled over, "You adoptin' strays now, Hargrove." Earl shrugged. "Reckon I am." "What is his name?" Earl looked at the mutt's battered face, the ear notched like torn paper, the way he never barked even once. "Whisper," he said. Whisper stayed. He stayed through rain, through fire, through the stench of death. The men started calling him a ghost dog. He moved from hole to hole without drawing attention, sometimes disappearing for hours and coming back with odd things, scraps of food, a glove, once even a pair of dog tags belonging to a boy they would lost in the trees. It was Sergeant Boone who got the idea first. They needed to get a message to Baker's squad half a mile east. The last runner had been shot. Radios were dead. The men argued. Boone looked at Whisper. "Think he can do it?" Earl did not answer. He knelt, scribbled the coordinates on a torn scrap of map, wrapped it in oilskin, and tied it to Whisper's collar. The dog looked up at him, eyes calm like he already understood. "Go on boy." Whisper vanished into the dark. Every second felt like a funeral drum. Earl sat with his fists clenched until his nails bit his palms. 43 minutes later, gunfire echoed to the east. Then miraculously it stopped. And then came the reply. 3 sharp whistles in the dark. Baker's squad had gotten the message. Reinforcements were moving. Whisper came back at dawn, soaked and limping but alive. Earl held him like a brother. From that day, Whisper was not just a stray. He was a messenger, a soldier. The kind the army never trained but always needed. He made 7 runs that week. Saved more lives than Earl could count. But war does not care about heroes. It was the 8th run that changed everything. Earl was bandaging a shrapnel wound in Private Miller's leg when Whisper returned. Something was wrong. The dog staggered into the hole and collapsed at Earl's feet, a clean hole torn through his flank. The message pouch was gone. Blood pooled fast. Earl screamed for help, but no medics were nearby. Boone knelt down beside him, eyes grim. "We are pulling out. Germans are retreating. But he ain't gonna make it." Earl's hands trembled. "Don't say that." Whisper opened his eyes, just once, and licked Earl's hand. Then he was still. Earl did not cry. Not then. He dug a grave with his bare hands beneath a twisted oak just outside the orchard line, where the moss was soft. Wrapped the dog in a torn army jacket and placed a biscuit beside his head. He left no marker, just a folded note tucked under Whisper's collar, sealed in wax, never meant to be read. 60 years later, May 2004. The letter came on a Tuesday. Earl was 80 now, living in a rusted cabin near Lake Waccamaw, North Carolina. His legs ached when it rained. Mabel and had passed 5 winters ago. He did not keep much, just a porch swing, a worn Bible, and a silver medal he never wore. He opened the mailbox and found it. A white envelope, French postmark, no return address. Inside, a photograph, a moss-covered oak tree, a rusted tag nailed to its bark, and 4 words scribbled on the back in neat cursive. He was a good soldier. Earl dropped the letter. His knees buckled, and the ghost he would buried beneath Normandy soil came clawing back. Part 2. The wax-sealed note. Earl Hargrove stared at the photograph on the kitchen table, his gnarled fingers trembling. He had not touched his coffee. The radio played soft gospel in the corner, but he did not hear it. He only saw that tree. That damned oak. He knew the bark, the roots, the bend of the branches that had once cradled a silent grave. For 60 years Earl had never spoken of the dog. Not to Mabel Ann, not even when she asked what happened in France. It was just a dog, he would always say. But it was not. He got up slowly and went to the old chest beneath the window, pulled back the quilt, reached for the tin box that had not been opened since '79. Inside were scraps of memory. A faded photo of Mabel Ann in a gingham dress. A yellowed postcard from Paris, never mailed. A bronze star, dulled by time, and beneath it, wrapped in a handkerchief, the second wax seal. The twin to the one he had left on Whisper's collar. He had written 2 copies that night. One for the dog, one to burn. But he never burned it. His hand shook as he broke the seal. The paper inside was brittle, edges curled. To whoever finds this dog saved my life. Saved others too. He carried words through hell so we could keep breathing. If you find him, please bury him kind. His name was Whisper. He was never afraid. Earl folded it shut and pressed it to his chest. Then he picked up the phone. The VA hospital in Wilmington patched him through to a man named Samuel Tate. Earl had not spoken to Sam in 43 years, not since the reunion in '61 where they would both gotten too drunk to look each other in the eye. Sam's voice was gravel, like old boots on gravel. "Hargrove, you still alive?" "I got a photo," Earl said. "From Normandy. Someone found the oak." Silence. "Then I thought that tree burned." "So did I. Where'd it come from?" "No return address." Sam exhaled through the phone. "You thinking what I am thinking?" "I am thinking someone found him." "The dog." Whisper. Another pause. "Where are you?" Sam asked. "Still in Waccamaw. I will drive." Sam showed up 3 days later. He was slower than Earl remembered, a cane, a stiff right leg, but his eyes had not changed. Same cold blue stare, same square jaw. They did not hug. Didn't need to. They sat on the porch with 2 glasses of bourbon, not talking for a long time. Then Earl showed him the photo. Sam studied it. "That is the place. You remember the run?" "I remember all of them," Sam said quietly, "but I remember the 8th most." He tapped the tree. "This is where you buried him." Earl nodded. Sam squinted at the back of the photo again. "That handwriting looks familiar." Earl tilted his head. "You think it is?" "I am not sure," Sam said, but his voice had turned quiet. "But someone out there remembers him. And they wanted us to know." The next morning they booked flights to Paris. The woman at the American Airlines counter raised an eyebrow. "You 2 fellas headed on vacation?" "Something like that," Earl muttered. They landed in France with stiff backs and cheap luggage, checked into a small inn in Bayeux, and rented a beat-up Citroën from a farmer with only 2 teeth and too many stories. Earl drove. Sam read the old map, marking landmarks from memory. Every mile toward the coast felt like peeling away a scar. They found the tree 2 days later, just beyond a patch of wheat near St. Mère-Église. It was bigger now, older, but the bark was the same. A small wooden tag was nailed low on the trunk, weathered but legible. Whisper 1944. War dog. Messenger. Hero beneath it. Someone had placed a stone. A smooth white stone with a name etched in cursive. Henri Beaumont. Earl's mouth went dry. Sam took off his cap. They knelt at the base of the tree. For a while neither man said a word. Then Earl whispered, "I never told Mabel about the note." Sam did not answer. He was holding something in his hand, a folded paper tucked behind the stone. Earl took it, opened it. It was a letter. To the American soldier who buried his dog here. "I was 13 when I saw you. My father had been killed in the orchard. My mother and I hid in the cellar. We saw the dog running messages. We thought he was an angel. I followed your unit for hours. Then I watched you bury him. You wrote something and tucked it under his collar. I was too scared to speak. But after you left, I went to him. I buried him deeper, marked his grave, and kept the note. I never forgot him. Or you. Whisper was a good soldier. He gave me hope. I am old now. But I wanted you to know. Henri Beaumont, Normandy." Earl folded the letter slowly. His eyes were full. Not with sadness but something deeper. Gratitude. Sam placed a hand on his shoulder. He remembered Earl smiled through the tears. "So did we." Part 3. The Boy in the Cellar. They stayed in Normandy 2 more days. Earl spent every hour he could beneath that tree. He did not say much, just sat on a camp stool with a thermos of black coffee and the letter in his lap, reading it over and over like scripture. Sam wandered the field now and then, cane tapping the earth like he was looking for ghosts. They both were. On the third morning, a woman from the local Mary stopped by in a red Peugeot. She wore her gray hair in a bun and spoke soft, careful English. "You are the American soldiers." "Yes, the ones from the photo." Earl stood. "You know who sent it?" The woman smiled gently. "Henri was my neighbor. He passed away in January. He left that picture and your names in a folder labeled Pour les Messengers. For the messengers." Sam chuckled. He remembered us as the messengers. But it was the dog who carried every word. She nodded solemnly. Henri said the dog was silent, but full of meaning back in the village. She led them to a modest stone house with blue shutters and ivy crawling up the walls. Inside everything was quiet, dusty, reverent. She unlocked a drawer in the writing desk. Inside was a bundle tied with twine, clippings, photos, sketches of Whisper drawn in pencil, and 2 pages in English written by Henri himself. Asterisk, I have tried to remember his face exactly. The patch on his eye. The quiet look he gave us before he ran. The night he died, I took the note. My mother said it was wrong, but I felt like I had to protect it. I read it 1,000 times. I did not understand all the words then, but I understood the heart. When I grew older, I became a teacher. I taught children how silence can hold meaning. I never told them where that truth came from. It came from a muddy battlefield. From a dog named Whisper. From 2 men who looked tired and holy. From America. From kindness. From courage. Star. Sam read the note and sat down hard in the chair beside the window. He wiped his eyes with his sleeve. We thought no one saw. That we buried him alone. Earl nodded. Turns out we were being watched. By a boy hiding in a cellar. The woman poured them coffee in delicate white cups. Henri often said he owed his life to that animal. Not for saving him, but for reminding him what men can be. He used to say, he carried more than notes, he carried decency. They left with copies of the papers and a hand-drawn map Henri had made of the area as it was in 1944. On the flight home, neither man slept. North Carolina 2 weeks later. Earl stood on the porch of his cabin overlooking Lake Waccamaw. A soft rain tapped the tin roof. The morning mist hung low across the water, and the loons were calling. Sam sat beside him with a cigar in his teeth, his boots propped on the rail. They would gone through the old box again, letters, ribbons, medals. But Earl had pulled something else from the back of the drawer, a worn-out leather collar with a rusted brass loop. He held it in his hands now, staring at it like it might speak. "You kept it all this time," Sam said. Earl nodded. Couldn't let it go. He turned the collar over. "You think we ought to tell someone? A museum, maybe?" Sam shook his head. "No, this was not for historians. It was for us. For Henri. For the kid who watched from the shadows." Earl smiled faintly. "And for Whisper." They sipped their coffee and let the silence say what words never could. Later that afternoon, they drove into town. The American Legion Hall was quiet. The flag at half-mast for someone who had passed the day before. Inside, Earl stepped to the wall where portraits of veterans hung. He found the empty frame at the end. He placed a new photo there. It showed a mutt dirty, one ear torn, tongue lolling, eyes soft and curious. Beside him, a young soldier with mud on his helmet crouched low, arm around the dog's neck. A pencil note beneath read, "Whisper Normandy 1944. He did not bark. He just carried what mattered. Later that night, Earl sat alone on his porch as the sky went deep blue. He held the old collar and spoke quietly into the wind. "I kept your note, boy. Someone else did too." A loon called in the distance. "I am glad you were found. I am glad you were remembered." He looked up at the stars. "And I will see you again." The wind shifted, and Earl Hargrove swore he heard it. A whisper. Part 4. The photograph and the question. They stayed in Normandy 2 more days. Earl Hargrove spent every hour he could beneath the tree. He did not say much, just sat with a thermos of black coffee, the letter from Henri Beaumont folded neatly in his coat pocket, and the rusted dog collar wrapped around his hand like a prayer rope. Sam Tate kept to the edge of the wheat field, eyes scanning the past. He tapped the dirt with his cane and muttered to himself, half watching the wind, half listening to ghosts. They both knew the trip had changed something, but they did not yet know how much. On the second afternoon, they visited the mairie, the town office where Henry's records had been filed after his death. The clerk, a woman with round glasses and gentle hands, handed Earl a brown envelope. "There was one more thing Monsieur Beaumont left," she said. "He asked it be delivered if you ever came." Inside was a photograph, black and white, faded at the edges. A dog, clearly Whisper, stood beside a pile of rubble, his body tense, alert. Behind him, part of a collapsed farmhouse. The roof had caved in. Smoke billowed in the background. But it was not just the dog that caught Earl's breath. There was a child in the corner of the photo, maybe 4 or 5 years old, half hidden behind stone. Dirty face, white eyes, clutching a rag doll. Whisper stood between the child and the smoke. Sam leaned in, squinting. "That ain't from any military record I have seen." The clerk hesitated. "There is a woman you should meet. A journalist. She has been researching Whisper for some time. She knew Henri. Says there is more to this story." Earl looked up. "More than 7 message runs and a grave under an oak." The clerk smiled faintly. "She thinks Whisper did not just save soldiers." The woman's name was Leah Marceau. She was in her 30s, sharp-eyed, soft-spoken, with boots covered in dust and a notebook always in hand. They met at a small cafe near the beach at Arromanches. "I grew up hearing about the ghost dog of Normandy," she said. "They called him Le Messager Silencieux, the silent messenger. I thought it was folklore. Until I found the grave. And then the photo. And then Henry's files." She laid them out across the cafe table, sketches, records, snippets of letters. One note stood out. Henri had written, "The child in the ruins was never found again. But the dog came back alone, covered in soot, eyes full of smoke." Earl sat back, his face tight. "He never barked," he said. "That was his thing. Whisper did not bark." Leah looked at him gently. "Monsieur Hargrove, we found 5 separate testimonies from villagers. All said the same thing. That during one of the worst days of shelling, a white dog barked once. Just once. And a child survived because of it." Earl stared at the table, then down at the collar in his lap. It felt heavier than before. Sam folded his arms. "So what are you saying? That he went off script?" "I'm saying," Leah said, "that your dog might have saved more than soldiers. That there is a story no one ever told. A missing piece." She pulled out one last photo. It showed the same child. A little older, dressed in a school uniform. No name, no location. Just a scribble on the back. "Found, please ask about the dog." That night Earl could not sleep. He sat by the inn's small window, watching fog roll in from the fields. The collar sat on the nightstand, next to Henry's letter. He reached for his notebook and wrote 4 words. What else did he carry? Then he circled it, twice. The next morning he made the call. He asked Leah if she would guide him to the old farmhouse site. Then he called Sam's room. Hope you did not unpack, he said. Sam grunted. Hell, where we going now? Back to the rubble, Earl said. There is something Whisper did not tell us. Part 5 Beneath the Ashes. They returned to the edge of the forest at sunrise. Leah led them on foot across a narrow ridge path, the map tucked under her arm, boots crunching frostbitten soil. The wind whistled low across the Normandy fields, soft, but insistent. The remains of the farmhouse lay where they would always been forgotten, unmarked, tangled in undergrowth. A rusted hinge jutted from the stone. Burnt timbers slouched like tired bones. It had not been touched in decades. Earl stood in silence, his eyes tracing the layout from memory. I think this is where he brought her, Leah said, pointing toward a collapsed stairwell half covered in moss. Sam squinted. What makes you so sure? Leah crouched and pulled something from beneath the stone. A piece of cloth, charred, faded, but the pattern was unmistakable, red and white checks, like a child's apron. I found this last time, she said softly. That photo of the girl, she is wearing the same fabric. Earl stared. Then he stepped forward and dropped to one knee, brushing ash and leaf litter from the stone floor. There, scorched into the foundation, barely visible beneath years of dust. Claw marks, 3 side by side. Then another angled. Like a turn. Like something had dug here. Frantic. Focused. Whisper did this, Earl murmured. Sam looked away. He was trying to get her out. They dug for 2 hours. Carefully. Slowly. As if afraid to disturb a ghost. At last, they found it, an old metal case wedged between 2 cracked stones. Inside, wrapped in waxed canvas, were 3 items. A folded sheet of music, singed at the edges. A French ration card from 1944 with the name Elise Marchand. And a hand-drawn sketch of Whisper, standing beside a little girl. The girl was smiling. That afternoon, Leah made phone calls from the back of the cafe. When she returned, her face was pale. I found her, she said. Earl blinked. Found who? The girl. Elise Marchand. She is alive. She is 82. Lives 2 hours south of here. Sam set down his coffee. She remember anything? She does not remember much of the war. Just flashes. But she remembers a dog with white fur and sad eyes. She says he led her away from a fire. She followed him into a ditch and stayed there until a woman found her. She thought he was a dream. 2 days later, they sat in the sunlit garden of a care home outside Cannes. Elise Marchand was frail, with bright eyes and careful hands. She held the sketch like it was a photograph of an old friend. I always wondered if he was real, she whispered. The dog who came through the smoke. He did not bark. Not until the last second. Then he turned and barked, loud and sharp like a warning. That is how I knew to run. She looked at Earl. You say his name was Whisper? Earl nodded. She pressed her fingers to her lips. I never forgot his eyes. He looked at me like he already knew I would live. On the way back to the inn, no one spoke, until Sam broke the silence. He broke his rule. What rule? Leah asked. He barked. Sam said. He never did that. Not once. Not through shelling or smoke or sniper fire. Earl looked out the window. Maybe he knew a soldier needed silence, he said. But a little girl needed a voice. That night, Earl opened his notebook again. This time, he did not write a reflection. He wrote a question. If Whisper saved one child we did not know about, how many others did he reach? Beneath it, he jotted another note from memory. Henri once said, the dog came back covered in soot, and with something in his eyes I never forgot. Earl sat with it for a long time. Then he turned to a fresh page, and began to write. Whisper's 8th run was not his last. Part 6, The Forgotten List. They left Normandy with more questions than answers. Elise Marchand's story had opened something. Not just in Earl Hargrove, but in Sam and Leah too. It was not just the past they were chasing anymore, it was the proof that somewhere amid the chaos of war, something silent and selfless had moved unseen, stitching lives back together. Back home in North Carolina, Earl could not sleep. The house felt too quiet, too still. The collar on his nightstand was starting to feel like an invitation, not a memory. 3 weeks later, package arrived from Leah. Inside was a bound manuscript, Henri Beaumont's personal journal, the full version, never translated, never published. Leah had spent days deciphering his handwriting. Her note read, Earl. Found this in a false drawer behind Henry's writing desk. I think he never meant to share it publicly, but I think he meant you to see it. Page 47. Earl set the kettle on, then turned to the page. It was a single list. Names, locations, partial dates, survivor's dog's route. Some were incomplete. Farmwoman near La Camburned barn, survived under cart. Boy with harmonica, Oak Grove, returned 1946. American nurse, injured. Hidden with child, never found. At the bottom, a faint annotation. All said a white dog came first. Earl called Sam. You remember a nurse gone missing after the orchard push? Sam paused. Barely. Just whispers. Some kid said a woman was carried out on a tarp days later, but she was never logged. HQ did not keep track of every civilian casualty. She was not a civilian. She was ours, Earl said. And she had a child with her. Sam grunted. You think it was Elise? No. Different time. Different place. There was silence on the line. Then, you thinking what I am thinking? I think Whisper found her. With Leah's help, they combed through declassified U.S. Army Field Hospital records from 44. One name appeared again and again before abruptly vanishing. Corporal Marion Tiernan, field nurse, 29th Infantry Division. Last known coordinates matched the edge of a civilian zone evacuated during a German artillery barrage near the same corridor Whisper had used to run messages. Sam leaned back in his chair, eyes wide. She was there. Leah had already traced a next of kin. Grace Tiernan, 79 years old. Lives in Pennsylvania. And she had something she wanted to share. Earl and Sam flew north. Grace met them at her front porch, flanked by two old Labradors and a wind chime that clinked like whispers. She was warm, quiet. Her voice had the calm of someone who carried grief like a photo in her wallet, never flaunted, never forgotten. My mother never talked about the war, she said. But when I was 5, she gave me this. She handed Earl a cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside was a weathered field journal. The paper brittle, corners frayed. On the inside cover, one line, scrawled in faded pencil. The dog found us, Grace continued. She said he had white fur. That he stood at the mouth of the cellar where they were hiding. She would been shot in the leg. She could not walk. The child me was barely old enough to crawl. Sam leaned in. She said he barked once. Just once. Then ran off. An hour later, soldiers found them. One of the medics said, we followed a dog's prints to this place. But they never identified who the dog belonged to. Earl held the journal tightly. His fingers trembled. Whisper had saved them too. And no one ever knew. That night, Earl wrote in his notebook again. We thought the 8th run was the end. It was not. Whisper did not stop when the orders did. He kept going, because someone needed him. He closed the notebook and stared out the motel window. In the parking lot below, a dog barked once. Sharp. Clear. Earl did not move. He just smiled. Part 7. The Lost Sketchbook. After returning to North Carolina, Earl and Sam found themselves restless. Something about Grace Tiernan's story would not let go. Whisper had continued past what any soldier or record had accounted for. How many more stories lay hidden untold, unmarked, unclaimed? Leah called again 2 weeks later. I have found something, she said. You always do, Sam muttered. No, she said. This time it is different. In a crumbling church archive near Vierville-sur-Mer, tucked behind a broken cabinet, Leah had uncovered an old wooden box marked with Henri Beaumont's initials. Inside, water-damaged photos, clippings from underground newspapers, and a leather-bound sketchbook. She mailed it to Earl with careful instructions to wear gloves and read slowly. The pages were fragile, but intact. Each sketch showed a different scene. A dog's paw print beside a broken fence. A farmhouse window with smoke curling from the glass. A child's hand reaching through rubble. And always Whisper in the corner. Sometimes just a silhouette. Sometimes sketched in bold graphite strokes like Henri had drawn in a trance. But one page was different. It was not a sketch. It was a list. A short one. 3 lines. Civilians recovered after silent warning. All said the dog barked once. None knew where he went after. Earl stared at the page. Henri knew, he whispered. He knew what Whisper was doing. Sam nodded. And he did not tell anyone. He kept it to himself. Why? Leah had an answer. She would included it in her letter tucked inside the box. Henri once told me that silence is a kind of respect. That when something sacred passes through your life, you do not write it up for the newspapers. You just live quieter after. The final page of the sketchbook showed something no one expected. Not just Whisper. 2 dogs. Both white. One larger, standing at attention. The other smaller, leaner. Eyes wide. A mirror or a shadow. And beneath it, in careful script, Le second trained, not tamed. Earl's mouth went dry. Sam sat forward. You do not think. Leah's voice buzzed in on speaker. I think Whisper was not alone. That night, Earl dreamed of the orchard. But it was not the war anymore. It was quiet. The trees full. The air clean. And in the middle of the path stood Whisper. Behind him, another dog stepped forward. Smaller. Younger. Eyes full of stormlight. Whisper turned once as if to say, "It is not finished," and disappeared into the trees. Part 8: The Nurse's Trail. The sketchbook changed everything. Not just the drawing of the second dog, but what it suggested. Whisper had not just been a lone figure slipping between foxholes. He had been followed, mirrored, maybe even imitated. And if that were true, then someone else, somewhere had seen it happen. That someone came forward unexpectedly. An email from Leah arrived with a subject line that read, "Found her." The woman's name was Margot Elkins, 91 years old, living in Western Virginia. She was bedridden now, but her memory, according to her niece, was sharp as rifle fire. She had served as a Red Cross field nurse during the war. The niece had stumbled across one of Leah's translated articles online, and showed it to Margot, expecting nothing. But Margot had stared at the screen, silent for a long time, before whispering, "I saw that dog." But there were 2. Earl and Sam made the trip 2 days later. Margot's home was quiet, filled with soft ticking clocks and faded sepia photographs. She was propped in a recliner, a wool blanket over her lap, and a silver cross at her throat. "I never thought I would tell this story again," she said. Then she pointed to a photo on her wall taken in '45, grainy and torn. It showed a field tent, and just in the corner, the blur of a white dog disappearing behind a flap. "He came every 3rd night. Brought scraps. Socks once. I thought I was hallucinating until Private Ramirez swore he saw him drop a glove at a boy's feet and run." Earl leaned in. "You are sure there were 2? Margot smiled. "One was bigger. Quiet. Stared you down like a preacher. The other one had a tremble to him. Nervous. But fast. Like he was learning." Later that night, Sam stood on the hotel balcony, looking out over the highway lights. "You thinking what I am thinking?" Earl nodded. Whisper was not just carrying messages. He was making something. A legacy. Sam lit a cigarette, the tip flaring in the dark. "Think he trained the second?" Earl shrugged. "Or maybe the second just followed. Like the rest of us back in Waccamaw." Earl sat at his kitchen table with the sketchbook open beside his coffee. He turned to the final page again, the 2 dogs, and traced the caption with his finger. "Le second trained, not tamed." He flipped the sketchbook over and tapped the spine. Something rattled. A folded paper had slipped between the binding. He pulled it free. A field report. American. Dated August 17, 1944. Unclassified. From a unit north of Falaise. Scout Patrol reported a dog leading them through smoke to a wounded corporal. Witnesses said they heard 2 dogs barking that night. One deep, one high-pitched. They followed the prints. Recovered soldier. Dogs were gone by the time backup arrived. Earl set down the paper and stared at the collar beside his notebook. "We were wrong," he said aloud. The message was not the note. He closed his eyes, whispering as if to someone in the other room. "It was you. You were the message." Part 9: The Trail of Smoke. Earl Hargrove was not sleeping much. Not from nightmares, those had eased with time, but because of something else. A hum beneath the skin. Like the war was not finished with him. Like Whisper still had something left to say. He could not explain it, not even to Sam. But in the quiet hours before dawn, Earl often found himself staring out over Lake Waccamaw, collar in one hand, Henry's sketchbook in the other, whispering, "What did I miss?" The answer came by mail. Again, Leah had sent a scanned clipping from a little-known Canadian dispatch report dated late August 1944. It referenced a pattern of animal-assisted navigation through unstable German lines north of the Falaise Pocket. Buried in the margin, a scribbled note by a field scout. Astra's 2 dogs, canine shadowed the first. White, smaller, hesitated near fire. Still let us out. Save the corporal. Asterisk. This was the 3rd independent confirmation of a second dog. It was time to go back. Normandy once more. The fields had not changed much. Just quieter, grayer. Fog clung low to the wheat like it remembered everything too. Leah had mapped the trail combining Henry's notes, Allied movement records, and civilian accounts of strange rescues. The line was unmistakable. The dogs had formed a corridor, a ghost route that passed through shell-blasted towns and sniper-infested roads. And at the far end of the map was a village long thought destroyed. Saint-Hilaire-du-Bosque. It was not on many maps anymore. The war had leveled it, and most survivors had moved west. But one house remained. Barely. And someone lived there. His name was Armand Lefebvre. Old, crooked, with a twisted cane and eyes like flint. When they knocked on his door, he did not greet them. He just said, "You are here about the dog." Leah explained gently that they were following stories of a white mutt who saved civilians. Armand did not smile. "You think war's a storybook?" he growled. "You think that dog was a blessing?" Earl stepped forward. "He saved lives." Armand looked him over. "I tried to shoot that dog," he said. They stood in silence. Sam blinked. "Come again." Armand hobbled inside and returned with a rusted hunting rifle, the barrel bent and the stock splintered. 44. "We were starving. My mother was dying. I saw a white dog carrying bread in its mouth, running between the trees. I aimed, pulled the trigger." He stared at the weapon like it still held the sin. But he did not run. He stopped, looked at me, like he already knew I would not do it again. He leaned against the doorframe. "He left the bread." Earl swallowed hard. "Why are you telling us this now?" "Because I was the first to see the second dog. Pup maybe. Didn't look like much. Nervous thing. But it followed him. I saw it with my own eyes. Thought I was losing my mind. But it was real." He looked down at the dirt. "That dog. They were not just messengers. They were reminders that there was still something decent left in us." Before they left, Armand reached into his coat and handed Earl a pouch. "Found this in the rubble. Meant to throw it out. But I did not." It was oilskin. Torn. Empty now. But stamped in faded ink was a phrase Earl had not seen in years. 29th Infantry Division Messenger Pack B. Whispers. Or perhaps the other ones. That night, in the old hotel in Bayou, Earl laid the pack next to Whisper's collar and opened his notebook. Asterisk. He was building something. A message chain. One life to the next. Not a hero. Not a myth. A movement star. He turned the page. Drew 2 paw prints. Side by side. Part 10. Fire and shell. Rain clung to the stone gutters of Bayou the next morning. Earl Hargrove sat under the hotel awning, watching clouds roll over the cathedral spire, boots damp from pacing, hands cradling a warm cup of bitter French coffee. Sam joined him with a slow grunt. "Been up since 5. Dreamt of boots stuck in mud." Again Earl nodded. "I dreamt." Whisper looked back at me and said, "Not yet." Sam squinted. Said. Earl sipped. "In the dream." And I believed him. Leah arrived with her phone clutched tight. "I found something," she said. Someone actually. She turned the screen. A video played grainy footage from the early 2000s. A woman, American in her 60s, giving a public library talk in Vermont. She spoke of her father, Corporal Edward March, who had served in the 29th Division, and had always told her one story in hushed tones. That after a German mortar hit near the orchard. He woke in a field hospital with no idea how he would been found. All he remembered was a white dog, and a second dog smaller, that had pulled at his sleeve. She ended her story with these words. My father used to say, I owed my life to a ghost. But he left footprints. Leah had tracked down the woman Marion March, now in her late 80s, living in Maine. She agreed to meet. A week later, Earl and Sam stood on her wraparound porch overlooking pine woods and Atlantic wind. Marion's hands were thin, freckled but firm. She poured them coffee and pulled out a battered notebook from her father's things. I have never shown this to anyone. But it does not belong to me. Not really. Inside the notebook were hand-drawn maps, crude sketches of foxhole placements, and one simple page that made Earl's breath stop. August 19, 1944. 2 dogs. First barked once. Second barked twice. I followed the sound. They disappeared. I lived. Asterisk asterisk. Sam rubbed his forehead. That is it. That is proof. Marion looked out toward the trees. My father believed the second one learned what the first knew. Like a whisper turned into a shout, Earl smiled at the phrase. Back in North Carolina, Earl copied the journal page and pinned it beside Henry's final sketch. He had no photos of the second dog. No name, no medal, no grave. But he was sure of one thing now. Whisper had passed something on. Not just a route, purpose. That night, Earl visited the Legion Hall again. He added a second frame beside Whisper's. Blank except for 4 words, typed in bold beneath a clean silhouette. The second messenger. Barked when needed. He did not need a name. The story would speak for itself. Part 11. The final message. Fall set in slow around Lake Waccamaw. The mornings brought fog and the quiet crunch of leaves under boots. Earl Hargrove's walks grew shorter, his breath tighter but his purpose clearer. He carried Henry's sketchbook everywhere now, like a war diary passed down through time. Sam had taken to calling it the gospel according to Whisper, but it was not until a letter arrived from Leah, marked urgent, that Earl finally understood the ending was not quite written yet. Inside the envelope was a photograph, sepia-toned, taken in early 1945 by a returning French soldier cleaning out a collapsed farmhouse. It showed a crude grave marked by a rusted tin tag, hammered into a stake beside a pile of stones. Scratched into the tag. Messenger 2. Leah's note read. Asterisk. The coordinates match the Western Retreat Corridor outside Rouen. This was never a documented Allied checkpoint. But the tin same alloy as U.S. Field markers. I believe the second dog was buried there. Asterisk. Earl took a breath so deep it felt like it scraped the bottom of his lungs. He called Sam. We are going back. Sam groaned. You are dragging me to France again. This is the last time. Normandy again for the final time. The coordinates led to a field overgrown with brush and silence. No markers. No flag. Just a ring of trees and earth that felt watched. They dug carefully. Not deep, just enough. The grave had mostly collapsed in. Years of frost and rain doing their work. But they found bones. 2 pieces of collar. 1 brass buckle. And beneath it all, a message capsule. Still sealed. Sam held his breath as Earl unscrewed it. Inside a note. Faded. Cracked. Barely legible. But they could still read it. Asterisk. Not trained. Chose to follow. Do not forget him. Star. Neither man spoke. Earl knelt beside the grave and pressed the message to his heart. Messenger 2. He whispered. You were not second. You were sent. That night, they slept under the stars beside the grave. No hotel. No Wi-Fi. Just firelight and the rustle of the trees. Earl stared into the dark. Voice low. I used to think Whisper was the only one. That what he did was his alone. He paused. But maybe that is the message. Maybe we do not finish things. We just hand them off. Sam tossed another log on the fire. Maybe that is what faith is. Believing the message gets through even when we do not. The next morning they placed a small wooden cross over the grave. No name. Just 1 carved word. Continued. Then they stood in silence. Listening. The wind moved through the trees. And somewhere in the distance, a single sharp bark. Part 12: The Bark in the Wind. Back in North Carolina, winter arrived without warning. Earl Hargrove walked slower now. The cold ached deeper. But the weight that had hung on his chest for most of his life was lighter, like a page had finally turned. Sam stayed with him most nights, ever since their last return from France. They did not speak about what they would see at the second grave, not out of avoidance, but reverence. Some stories only needed to be witnessed. At the Legion Hall, the second frame no longer stood blank. A child had left a drawing crayon on printer paper taped to the glass. Two dogs, one big, one small, standing on a battlefield. A speech bubble said, "Follow me," beneath it, in crooked handwriting. My grandpa said dogs know when we are scared. This one knew when to help. Earl started visiting local schools. He did not tell them about blood, or bullets, or foxholes. Just about Whisper. About what it meant to carry something for someone else, without asking for thanks. He would bring the collar, hold it up gently, let them touch the worn leather. This, he would say, was part of a dog who did not know the word war, but understood courage anyway. One boy raised his hand. Did the second dog have a name? Earl paused, then said softly, he had something better. He had a purpose. On the anniversary of D-Day, Earl returned to Normandy one last time. This time alone. Leah met him near the oak. They stood in silence, side by side, the graves now marked and freshly tended. Beneath the main tree sat a stone bench placed there by a local family who'd heard the story and decided not all heroes needed statues. Earl placed a final item in the soil beside the bench. His notebook, wrapped in cloth, waterproofed. Inside, he had written everything. Every name, every sketch, every message Whisper ever carried. On the last page, asterisk: some heroes bark. Some never speak, but if you listen when the wind shifts, you will hear them anyway. Asterisk. Back in Waccamaw, Earl's porch swing creaked gently in the morning wind. The lake shimmered, light breaking through pine branches overhead. The Legion Hall photo wall now had 3 frames. Whisper, Messenger 2. A new one blank but with a plaque that read, "To those who carry what matters, may your silence speak volumes." Earl passed quietly one evening in early spring. In his sleep, no pain. The collar rested beside his bed. A small note in his handwriting lay on top. It was never about me. It was always about the message. And the dog who carried it. Epilogue. Somewhere in northern France, a child walks a forest path with her father. She pauses at the base of a wide oak, where 2 small graves rest side by side. Who were they, she asks. The father kneels, brushes moss from the nameplates. One was called Whisper, he says. He carried hope. And the other? The father smiles. The one who followed him. Then they stand. The wind shifts. And for a heartbeat, just a moment, a bark echoes through the trees. The end. For those who followed without command, and carried more than they were ever asked to.